Salve discipoli. Today we're going to be talking about Castra Romana, Roman camps. We've ended our historical discussion so far at the monarchy with the end of Tarquinius Superbus, but into the early republic and the middle republic, Rome expanded greatly outside of the city of Rome into the rest of Italy, and it is the Roman legions, the Roman troops that made all of this possible. Before we begin, a few of our I cans. We're going to, by the end of this video, be able to identify the term for common soldiers and understand the importance of Roman soldiers in bringing about Roman culture to other areas, this idea of Romanization and cultural assimilation. We're also going to be able to identify the two main roads in a typical Roman camp, and then identify other buildings or other areas located in a typical camp. For this first part, Discipoli, you're not going to need to write anything down, not until you see pencils in that upper corner. So for the beginning part of the video, go ahead and just listen as I kind of talk to you about the Roman army. As we left off in the monarchy, the soldiers typically came from the general populace, and men were expected to join the army as a duty. This is especially true if you wanted to join a political career. For the ancient Roman of a certain social class, really the army or politics were the only two honorable choices for a profession. And it started to become a problem that the soldiers needed to arm themselves. If you remember our king Servius Tullius, he was the one who divided the Romans into social classes based on their wealth. And it was in terms specific to how much they were able to bring with them when they joined the army. Were they able to just bring perhaps a sword? Then they would be the lowest classes. Could they outfit a horse and bring that as well? Or were they able to bring all of the various military equipment when they joined? Over time, especially towards the end of the monarchy and into the early republic, a much larger army was needed, and that is because soldiers would typically come from the plebeian class as a means of trying to move up in rank, and the plebeian class is that lowest class, which meant that they couldn't afford to bring much with them in terms of weapon, armors, horses, and they also didn't have the education to support being a military leader. And it meant that over time, the empire, the Republic of Rome, needed to arm their soldiers themselves, rather than depending on them to bring it with them. In the end, this created a standing army, and there are a lot of repercussions of having a standing army rather than just an army of general people that you would call when hostilities broke out. When you have a standing army, there are new requirements and new techniques as you go forth and conquer. There's going to be fixed units for greater maneuverability. You're going to have a fixed camp formation, once again as a measure of efficiency. And of course, we remember that the roads were built by the soldiers as the empire expanded, and so that the empire could expand. The result of having a standing army meant that Rome could now form alliances with their conquered cities. It was in fact fairly common for Rome to create alliances with the cities that they had conquered. And one of the ways that they would create alliances would be to eventually grant citizenship to those loyal allies after they conquered them. In addition to that, they would also sometimes incorporate aspects of that town's daily lives or society into new Roman society. One of the primary examples of this is the Romans' preference for incorporating local gods into the Roman pantheon of gods so that the local allies could still celebrate and worship their own particular deity. And of course, being able to form these alliances with conquered cities allowed the Romans to build additional towns, which allowed them to control the countryside, as well as bestow additional favors on those cities loyal to them, because it allowed greater efficiency in terms of travel, in terms of protection with the soldiers, and in terms of commerce. In the Roman army, there are really a couple of different types of people. Your basic milites legionarii, which is the term for your ordinary foot soldier, and then these foot soldiers would refer to themselves as contubernales, or bunkmates, referring to the fact that they would generally sleep in one large tent. And it's these milites legionarii, these ordinary foot soldiers, that had the most contact with these subjugated and conquered peoples. And as Rome conquered more and more of Italy, these common soldiers really helped bring about the Romanization of foreign people. One of the primary ways that Romanization was brought about was through marriage, and typically the Roman soldiers would marry women from the areas in which they were stationed. They'd be away from the city of Rome for a long time, and in order for them to find love, they'd need to find it where they were at rather than in the city of Rome itself. Typically, for a Roman soldier, if you were below the rank of a centurion here, your marriage was not legally valid. In the marriage ceremony, you're probably going to notice a few similarities between the Roman marriage ceremony and our own. Of course, it needs to take place in front of witnesses. Typically, the contubernales, those bunkmates of the soldier, would be witnesses to the marriage ceremony, in addition to the woman's family and friends. A typical Roman marriage ceremony would involve placing a gold ring on the third finger of the left hand, and this practice has continued on into today. And finally, the marriage ceremony would not be complete without the traditional vow, ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia. When you are Gaius, I am Gaia. One of the repercussions of having a standing army apart from greater Romanization and cultural assimilation is the nature of a fixed Roman camp, a castra romana. These were very carefully planned out by the agrimensores or surveyors, and once you see one Roman camp, you have literally seen them all because they are very similar in construction throughout time and location. Here are a couple of examples archaeologically. You can see the imprint of the Roman camp here with the modern day road kind of going through it. Here you can see another Roman camp. Yet again, very clear outlines of the Roman camps. And here we're left with a modern reconstruction based on the archaeological evidence. You can see that it is quite extensive, not just the castra itself, but the outlying buildings that were a part of most long-standing, long-term Roman camps. We're going to use this modern reconstruction as an example to look at a typical castra, a typical legionnaire's camp. And there are going to be two primary roads, the Cardo, which will run north-south through the village, and then the Decumanes, which ran east-west. There are two areas in a Roman camp that are frequently still surviving in the archaeology, and that is the Via Praetoria and the Porta Praetoria, which are both located next to the general's headquarters. And here the Via Praetoria belongs to the Cardo, the north-south road, and the area of the general, the Porta Praetoria, is right here with the general's headquarters right near the gate for easiest access to communication. Other areas within a Roman camp inside the castra would be the forum, which is the marketplace and gathering space for the Roman city. The castra over time, if they were long-standing and long-term, essentially became a small city in and of itself. This is also an area for the center of government, so we would have a lot of generals and officers located next to it, in addition to businesses, clothing repair shops, food stores, etc. The tabularium is the building where records were stored, and this is typically also going to be close to the general's headquarters, so along the Via Praetoria. And then the tentoria is the area of tents, and depending on the size of the castra and the size of the army, any of these tent areas would be considered a tenturia. In addition to the castra, any castra that is long-term is eventually going to build some sort of vicus next to it, and here you can see some of the outlying buildings that are part of the vicus. Every vicus, of course, is going to need domui or houses. The vicus, of course, could have its own forum and areas of entertainment. Here you can see a miniature coliseum. And then they're also going to have various taberna or shops alongside it for day-to-day commerce, much like the castra would have inside its walls. One thing to note would be that the vicus is entirely outside of the Roman fortifications and outside of this wall. So if this castra did come under attack, the vicus would need to be sacrificed because it wouldn't have the defensive capabilities to survive an attack. And unfortunately, if a Roman soldier did in fact marry, whether under the rank of centurion or over, his family would most likely be living in the vicus, and he would then visit his family when he was granted furlough from the castra. Now, most Roman castra would also have a fairly similar defensive structure or fortification. All castra are going to be built with some form of ditch and a wallum on which sharpened stakes would be built. And then only if the castra was going to become a permanent establishment would some sort of stone murus or fortification wall be built. But even without the murus, the ditch and the wallum with the sharpened stakes would create at least a temporary mechanism for defense. The addition of the stone muras, of course, would create an additional measure of defense. So to Scipoli, that's all we have to discuss for the Castra Romana. You should be able to identify the two main roads within the Castra as well as the various areas within the Castra and outside in the vicus, as well as be able to describe some aspects of Romanization that were brought upon by the Roman camps as Romans conquered more and more areas outside of Rome. Valete de Scipoli.